Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Vimbai, and good morning, I hope you're all
morning.
doing well this morning. Let me tell you what is happening around the world. Now, let's start in South Africa. Vimbai, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this story. Let's start in South Africa, where at least 100 people who were mining illegally essentially in an abandoned gold mine have died, essentially. Many more feared dead. This is, of course, because they had been trapped underground for months. Now, this is a situation and a story that we've talked about a few times on the World Brief. As early as November of 2024, we talked about how essentially there's been a standoff between the police, the government, and the illegal miners because the government didn't want to continue sending food and water and any type of critical resources down underground in order to flush these people out from underground in order for them to come and face, you can imagine, the long arm of the law. Now, to evade arrest and prosecution, many illegal miners have resorted to remain underground, but unfortunately this has had very dire consequences. We have seen on social media images surfacing of emaciated bodies of people who are still alive, and as I said, at least 100 people are already dead. Now, we had already talked about how the South African government had launched essentially a mission now to bring to surface illegal miners, and they had only changed their tune towards the end of last week. They did so because a sister of one of the miners filed a court petition because she had been able to receive a letter from underground where people were describing the awful conditions that they were facing underground, especially with the lack of course, hygiene resources, the lack of food, the lack of water. So in response to that, the government, the police have changed their tune, but there is still reports of a standoff. Now, in addition to this now process of trying to bring people back over ground, there's also the very, very harrowing details that we're hearing. Now, a miner who was able to make their way back to the surface in December, on the 23rd of December, he has talked about how he shared that how people underground had resorted to eating dead bodies because of the lack of food there. So you can imagine that this is a terrible situation happening over in South Africa, and we can only hope that as many people as possible can be saved as soon as possible. Now, moving from the African continent, let's move on to the Middle East now, where US President Joe Biden says that finally, a ceasefire deal between Israel and Gaza is finally coming to fruition. Now, what we do know is that Israel and Hamas have been at all-out war ever since October 7th, 2023. To remind you, Hamas operatives did come into Israel and conducted a gruesome terror attack during a festival there, killing people, committing acts of sexual violence, and taking hundreds of people as hostages. Now, what we are seeing as a result of that is a huge, as I said, all-out war between Israel and between Hamas, which has seen hundreds of thousands of people, especially in Palestine, especially in Gaza, killed. What we are seeing now is reports of finally some form of a ceasefire that will go beyond what we've already seen. Now, before getting to this point, there were examples of humanitarian pauses, allowing for medical and food aid to get into the country to aid civilians, but it does seem as though what we're hearing from the United States is that this could materialize into a ceasefire, which you can imagine Joe Biden, who has already entered the final days of his presidency, would like to leave office, having put together a lasting ceasefire in the Middle East. It would be something that would be quite an achievement for his own foreign policy legacy. But it's not only the United States at the negotiating table. Egypt, Qatar also have put together a lot of efforts to try and broker a deal that will be accepted and satisfactory to both sides. Now, when we're looking at what both sides want, Israel are very, very clear that they want the return of 33 hostages. And it does believe, according to some final drafts that were submitted on Monday, that it is likely that Hamas is going to agree to that, provided, of course, the bombardment of Gaza stops. Now, we are here on Tuesday now, and it is believed that in Doha, the Qatari capital, there will continue to be these last leg conversations, and hopefully, as the world waits, there will be a lasting ceasefire coming out of the Middle East. And finally, Pakistan International Airlines, they have resumed flights to Paris. It's they resumed flights earlier this month on the 10th of January, and they had been banned from flying to Paris because of a ban from the European Union. Essentially, they were very concerned about Pakistan International Airlines safety issues. Now, there had been crashes involving Pakistan International Airlines and also a controversial scandal involving the licensing of a pilot. So with all of these situations, with the European Union having the strong regulation it does, had banned Pakistan International Airlines from flying into Paris for the past 4 years. That is now ended. You can imagine that the people behind the PIA are very, very happy about that. And in order to celebrate and to advertise these new routes, because now they have 2 daily flights coming from the Pakistani capital to the French capital, they released an image of a plane, a PIA plane, flying towards the Eiffel Tower, and it had the copy, "We are coming." And unfortunately, that has fallen to a lot of criticism, not accusing, of course, PIA of any type of terrorism or involvement in terrorism, but the optics are terrible, essentially. And funnily enough, if we cast our minds back to 1979, PIA was also involved in another controversial advert. This time, they were promoting and advertising their flights from Pakistan to New York, and they had a plane overshadowing the Twin Towers. This is obviously decades before 9/11, but you can imagine that it has reignited conversations about how people should be a bit more mindful when it comes to advertising. Sometimes these things can fall through the cracks and clearly create a situation like we've seen here. But those are your stories on the World Brief. Love to hear your very, very brief comments before we move on to the papers.
Very, very briefly, Adefemi, thank you so much for that. Yeah, to South Africa, listen, it seems the more you look, the less you see, because this conversation is becoming more and more difficult to unpack and to find where the real truth is. So there are 3 mining shafts involved here, Shaft 10, Shaft 11, and the Margaret Shaft. The argument is that Shaft 10 and Shaft 11 are over 2 kilometers deep. So it's impossible, and they don't have stairs. So it's impossible for miners to climb out independently. However, the police had said that there is a way that these miners can come out through the Margaret Shaft. These new reports, independent investigations that are being done, are showing that there's no possible way for these miners to come out independently unless they're lifted out with a pulley and a rope. So the question is, where is the truth? You remember that famous statement by the minister when she said that no way, the South African government doesn't help criminals, that they'll rather smoke them out. And that's why they'd stopped sending aid, because they said they can't aid the facilitation of illegal activities. These guys must come out. And then over the past month, what we've seen is almost a mockery of this process, because these miners were now sending notes up to the surface. Some of their notes would be requesting for ketchup and mayonnaise, so it makes you wonder what was really happening under there. So the South African government is saying that this is a much bigger cartel at play. There's much more at play than what meets the eye. And of course, this is also a major milestone in their new operation called Vala Umgodi, which is the operation that's supposed to crack down on illegal miners. So is this the way to go about it? I suppose we're now going to have to start debating how moralistic it is to leave people conducting illegal activities and essentially to starve. And remember, a lot of them are also dying because they're HIV positive. They'd sent notes up asking for ARV and for various medication, and they weren't given that medication. So without it as well, that speeds up the end of their lives. So condolences to those who have lost their lives.
100 illegal miners dying is too high a price to pay for illegal mining, I would say. And, just like you mentioned, Vimba, it's called Zama Zama. It's quite popular in South Africa, and it's lost them a lot of revenue. In fact, according to INACT, 21 billion rand is lost annually in terms of tax revenue to illegal mining. 14 billion rand in gold production alone is lost annually. 10% of the gold mined in South Africa is exported illegally. So that's the loss to the economy. So you can understand the government's hard stance on whether or not to rescue these miners or not. However, it's important to mention that there's a court order saying that the police should end the standoff with the miners, which was given in November. To what extent that order has been followed, we don't know, because now we can see a number of people, miners who have died, and many more potentially at the risk of very serious ill health or dying. They're estimating about 500 miners still trapped underneath. But what a bigger issue around that, and this is where the conversation around morality, legality, and the likes come into play. If you look at the reason why people mine illegally, and you can understand that if you put that in the context of Nigeria, of course, there's the element of crime. So there are organized criminal gangs who operate, whether mines that have been abandoned or active mines. Then there's also the issue of poverty, which has come up a number of times, which is one of the reasons why what has been purported to why some people engage in illegal mining. They've also said as a way to address this is to legalize artisanal miners. And I bring that conversation to the same context as in Nigeria. You can tell as many people as possible not to scoop oil because of the disaster of when a spark happens. But because of the hunger and the poverty levels, people will not listen. It's a risk to them to just find a way to make ends meet. I'm not making a case for illegality or illegal mining, but I'm just saying that you must fix the fundamental issues, the challenges or the reasons behind before you begin to talk about harsh punishment to stop illegal mining in South Africa. That's my take on that.
Okay, Pakistani International Airlines. Last Friday, last week or so, the European Commission lifted a ban on Pakistan Airlines to now fly into the European Union. Now, Pakistan Airlines was blacklisted in 2020 by European Commission after, a crash in Karachi involving the death of 97 passengers on board. And then during investigations, it was discovered that Pakistan Airlines, that particular crash was due to pilot error. And that in any case, most of the pilots do not have a qualification or they became pilots with fake certificates. So the EU blacklisted Pakistan Airlines and also the US and also the UK. Now the EU has lifted a ban. The US and the UK have not. Now, last Friday, Pakistan Airlines began this campaign that they were going to Paris. And they had the advert that you have talked about, targeting the Eiffel Tower. Two issues have been raised in this regard. Pakistan was known to be a location for the Al-Qaeda at a time. So the question people are asking is, is this a threat? Is it a parody? Is it a statement about, 9/11? In the year 2001, there was the 9/11 incident in New York in the United States, when an aircraft targeted a building. So let's talk about that. People have also questioned the competence of the people who prepared the advert. Some people calling them, in fact, idiots. That how could they come up with such an insensitive, advert that recalls 9/11? That's that about that. The Pakistan Airlines has not responded yet, but maybe when they respond, they will pull the advert and come up with another one that is targeting one of the most iconic landmarks in the whole of Europe. That's what Biden and the Middle East and these negotiations being mediated by Qatar between Hamas and Israel. Well, we're told that a resolution could come within an hour, within a week, and it will be in 3 phases. In the first phase, on the first day of the agreement, Hamas will release 7 hostages. Now, Israel will provide passage for, people who are stranded in the south to go to the north. 1 week later, Hamas will release more hostages, another set of 7 or so. Israel will release about 1,000 prisoners. 90 of them will be persons who have spent more than 15 years in Israeli jails. Then on the 16th of the day of the agreement, there will be the second and third phases that will occur. Now, some of the details also includes the fact that, a corridor will be available for people in the south to go to the north, but they will have to go on foot, or they will go under arrangements that will be supervised by the Qatari and the Egyptian security agencies who will monitor if they are using cars in some instances. And then Israel will remain in control of the Philadelphia corridor, what is called the Philadelphia corridor. But the bigger issue here is not that the Palestinian officials or the Hamas officials or the Israeli officials who are close to this subject telling us that there is a move towards an agreement. The bigger issue is that in Israel, the right wing, the far right wing, they are fighting Netanyahu, and they are saying this is not possible. 10 right-wingers, including members of the Likud party, have written a petition to Netanyahu that this ceasefire will not happen. However, for the purposes of global peace and stability of the Middle East, what you will expect is that at this end, we will say, well, it's important that, the matter is resolved very quickly, hostages are exchanged, prisoners are released, and that the hell that President Trump is promising, because he says if hostages are not released before January 20, there will be hell that nobody has ever seen before. And his Middle East advisor was at that meeting in Doha. But if President Biden is able to pull this through, then it will be a major triumph for him, and Trump will not be able to impose that hell on the whole of the Middle East as promised.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Thank you very much for all of your comments. Exactly that. So we will keep our eyes very much peeled on the Middle East. Let's move on to the newspapers. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And this morning, This Day leads with comments from the Chief of Defence Staff, General Christopher Musa, who says that terrorist groups in Nigeria are getting foreign funding to destabilize Nigeria. He also noted that terrorists have been arrested with foreign currency in their possession as an indication of this foreign interference. He also says that he believes that there is a need for more proactive responses to the security challenges facing Nigeria. Now, moving on to this week's edition of the Advert, it wades into this dispute between First Bank and General Hydrocarbons Limited. Now, Onikepo Braithwaite refers to First Bank's actions in seeking an ex parte order to freeze the accounts of GHL and others to the tune of $225 million. She calls it an abuse of court process, and she says that because there was a pre-existing judgment in place. However, if you do read the article, which is always something I implore you all to do, she does go on to say that she is not aware of the facts of this case, and as a result she cannot comment on its merits. So puts a lot of things into context there. Moving on to the New Telegraph this morning, and the New Telegraph leads with comments again from Nigeria's Chief of Defence Staff. This time he revealed that a staggering statistics in Nigeria's fight against insurgency is that out of the 120,000 Boko Haram members who have surrendered, more than 60,000 of them, more than half of them, are children. Now, General Musa made this revelation on Monday during an interview with our very own Arise News, and he spoke about the ongoing efforts, as he says, to combat insurgency in Nigeria. The Punch this morning leads with the inside story, so they call, regarding the impeachment of Mudashiru Obasa as Speaker of the Lagos House of Assembly. He's 52 years old. And he was, of course, accused of gross misconduct and abuse of office. Reports also suggest that he did have political ambitions for 2027, building a series of buildings across local government areas in Lagos to this effect. Nevertheless, 90% of the lawmakers voted to impeach him, and Obasa was subsequently replaced by his deputy, Mojisola Morando, who is now the first woman in that position. Now, The Guardian this morning focuses on the Nigerian Communications Commission this week publicly releasing the names of 18 banks that have failed to settle their outstanding debts for using mobile network operators' unstructured supplementary service data platforms, USSD platforms. Now, these banks have collectively, they owe 200 billion naira, and the telecom regulator, the NCC, is preparing to take action, including suspending services for defaulters. Now, there's also a very interesting story on the front page of the Daily Independent, which reports on how the National Assembly is actually threatening to stop allocations to JAMB, the Joint Admissions Matriculation Board, in the 2025 cycle, unless it's able to provide satisfactory explanation on how it spent its 2024 monies. Now, the registrar of JAMB, Ishak Oloyede, was questioned over why the agency spent more than 1 billion naira on meals and refreshments, 850 million naira on security, cleaning and fumigation, as well as 600 million naira on local travel. Lots of questions there. And then finally, if we move to the United Kingdom, the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian and the Mirror all report on UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves. She's facing calls to step down. Despite this, Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister, has backed her in this backed her, saying that essentially she will remain Chancellor until the next general election. And he has also come out to warn that the Treasury will be ruthless over public spending cuts in order to meet government fiscal rules. Now, the Treasury is looking for billions of pounds of savings from departmental budgets to balance the books as this summer spending review is on the way. And this is clearly another difficult day for the UK economy, especially since we're seeing the cost of government borrowing rise and the value of the pound drop significantly. Meanwhile, a YouGov poll put Reform UK within 1 percentage point of Labour, with the Conservatives falling into third place. So we can run essentially from Reform UK, but according to this poll from YouGov, they are becoming increasingly far more popular in the country. Those are your papers from around the world.
Well, thank you very much, Adefemi. Unfortunately, we cannot go deeper into the details of the story, but just to say that this might very well validate Nigel Farage's claim on Boxing Day that they've edged out Conservative Party in terms of the number of registered members. All right, we'll see how that unfolds. Thank you so much for your time with us.